breaking news this morning. CNN has obtained transcripts that explain why the FBI opened an investigation into whether the President of the United States was working on behalf of Russia against American interests. These are transcripts of closed-door congressional interviews with two FBI officials who testified that officials were looking into whether President Trump was, quote, acting at the behest of and somehow following directions, somehow executing their will. They here is Russia. This follows a weekend of just huge headlines. The New York Times revealing this FBI counterintelligence investigation of the president, and the Washington Post report that the president went to extraordinary lengths to hide details of his meetings with Vladimir Putin, even from his own administration. The paper reports that after one meeting with Putin, the president even took his interpreter's notes. As far as we know, that's unprecedented. Now back to the New York Times. They have an extraordinary couple of sentences that put this weekend in perspective. Quote, the president of the United States was asked over the weekend whether he is a Russian agent, and he refused to directly answer.
If that's not enough drama, we are in day 24 of the government shutdown. It is now the longest in American history. A new CNN poll finds that most Americans blame President Trump for the shutdown, and a majority oppose his border wall. And even though 800,000 federal workers did not collect a paycheck on Friday, President Trump's economic advisor compares the shutdown to a vacation, saying that furloughed workers are, quote, better off. Meanwhile, more signs that Republicans are concerned that the standoff over the president's border wall is hurting their party politically. But let's begin with CNN's crime and justice reporter, Shimon Prokupecz, live in Washington with all of the breaking news this morning. Shimon.
Well, you know, Allison, these transcripts really give us a window into some of what was going on in the FBI, some of their thinking. Now, these two transcripts of the two FBI officials' closed-door congressional interviews reveal on one end that there was the idea that Trump fired Comey at the behest of Russia. And then on the other was the possibility that Trump was completely innocent and was acting within the bounds of his executive authority. Now, James Baker, the then top FBI lawyer, described the FBI's thinking about Russia, saying, quote, that was one extreme. The other extreme was the president is completely innocent, and we discussed that too, he said. There's a range of things this could possibly be. We need to investigate because we don't know whether, you know, the worst case scenario is possibly true, or the president is totally innocent, and we need to get this thing over with, and so he can move forward with his agenda. Now, this is what James Baker told members of Congress in his closed-door interview with him. And then in another interview from another FBI lawyer, Lisa Page, who, as you will recall, came under fire for her anti-Trump texts with Peter Strzok, she told members the FBI considered investigating Trump for some time, saying, quote, it's not that it could not have been done. This case had been a topic of discussion for some time. The waiting on was an indecision and a cautiousness on the part of the Bureau with respect to what to do and whether there was sufficient predication to open, she said, and that means open the investigation. Now, as we know, they did wind up opening an investigation, and all that now lives with the special counsel and his team. John and Allison.
Shimon, thank you very much for all of that fascinating reporting. Joining us now, CNN political analyst David Gregory, former director of communications for U.S. National Intelligence, Sean Turner, and former senior advisor to the National Security Advisor, Samantha Vinograd. Sam, just fascinating to see the transcripts now of what was going on, the conversations with these half dozen FBI officials who were trying to figure out why all of this strange behavior, right, that had gotten their attention. Was this a pattern? Was this something that they needed to investigate? And they concluded that it was. I mean, that just to, I think it bears repeating what Shimon just reported. They were having to consider whether the president of the United States had become a stooge for Russia. Okay. And as the legal counsel for the FBI said, that one was extreme. OK, they were looking at the worst case scenario. That one was extreme, he admits. The other extreme was that the president is completely innocent. And we discussed that, too. There's a range of things that it could possibly be. We need to investigate because we don't know whether the worst case scenario is possibly true or if the president is totally innocent. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are that that's what an investigation is, obviously, to figure out whether someone is guilty of a crime. And in this case, whether the president was knowingly or unknowingly a Russian asset. The key question coming out of these transcripts from me is, what the FBI actually thinks the president is up to today. Several months ago, during the campaign, right after the election, the president could make the argument that he was just being Donald Trump. He was saying things that fit with his platform and just being himself. At this point, he has to have been briefed that what he is saying and what he is doing is parroting Russian propaganda and actively helping Putin's own operation against the United States. Yet he continues to keep doing exactly the same thing. And so you just have to wonder, if the FBI was looking at him several months ago, a year ago, are they looking at him today based upon the fact that despite knowing that he's helping Russia, he continues to do exactly the same thing?
I think that's a really interesting question. And what this put in perspective for me is the reminder that what this is about was an attack, a Russian attack on the U.S. electoral system, and trying to find out the extent of that attack and trying to stop future attacks. And David Gregory, this jumped out to me in this text, in this transcript that James Baker, this is P106, or our control room knows. Not only would it be an issue of obstructing an investigation, but the obstruction itself would hurt our ability to figure out what the Russians had done, and that is what would be the threat to national security. In other words, David, and Benjamin Wittes has written extensively over the weekend about this, the obstruction that they were looking into, the president perhaps firing James Comey and some of the other events, the obstruction in and of itself was a type of collusion, trying to work with Russia to keep the extent of their attack secret.
Right, and the president was pretty clear about why he was firing Comey. In his interview with NBC with Lester Holt, he said because he didn't like the Russia investigation. Now, part of why he didn't write it is also in these transcripts. The people involved, Lisa Page, Peter Strzok, they had expressed animus toward the president in a political view. They argued in testimony that didn't keep them from doing their jobs professionally, but that certainly raises real questions. But even if you muck all of that up with those agendas, as the president would try to do, you step back. John and I, you and I were on the air the day the president at the Democratic convention called on Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's emails, find missing emails. So he was doing this. He was not only directly working, rhetorically, with the Russians, calling on them to hack her emails, but was parroting aspects of their propaganda at a time when they were working surreptitiously at the time to destabilize the election with an online campaign. And then you bring it up to now, as Sam was just saying, and you wonder, what is this relationship with Putin? Why isn't the president being more forthcoming about it? It's beyond kind of manic and unprofessional. It raises very serious questions about what he's doing, given his history, given his penchant for authoritarian leaders and his expressed support for Putin and his style in the past.
Sean, over on Fox, the president was actually asked about this weekend. He called in to Jeanine Pirro's show, and she asked him directly. Listen to this.
Are you now, or have you ever worked for Russia, Mr. President?
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. And if you read the article, you'd see that they found absolutely nothing.
Not a no.
Yeah,
but I doubt that he would have said something like that on the air. But what do you think of all of this, even hearing his response?
Yeah, I watched that segment, and I sat there thinking, Mr. President, the right answer is no. Look, I think what the president has done here is he's created an optic here where it's clear that there are aspects of this relationship with Vladimir Putin that neither his senior advisors and certainly not the public are aware of. And as a result of that, considering everything that's going on with people in the president's orbit who have been in touch with the Russians and with this investigation going on, the president has created this sense that he and Vladimir Putin have something that the rest of us need to know about. I don't think that the president, I'm of the mind the president probably has never been in a position to directly take orders and direction from Vladimir Putin. However, that doesn't matter, because if we go back and look at what happened on the campaign trail, and we look at what's happened up until now, as Sam was pointing out, the president has engaged in a series of actions that are not easily explained with regard to dealing with Vladimir Putin. And so we're in a situation where we hope that Bob Mueller will shed some light on the nature of this relationship, but we really don't know what it is the president and Vladimir Putin have between each other.
And there is a difference between when you're president and when you're a candidate, especially when you have no political background. But as a candidate, what did Trump do? He said, look, anybody who comes forward with opposition research on my opponent, why wouldn't you open the doors? So it's Russians. Nobody around him is saying, you don't do that. Because he's hired a campaign manager who had extensive ties with Russia, and Ukraine's a Paul Manafort who is now in prison. And then as president, you know, there's this obvious petulance of the president who has decided that he, you know, is so tough on Russia, he's not going to give any quarter. And I mean, he apparently doesn't mind looking suspicious about all of this.